Hey guys, it's Larry with the Financial Lift, and today I want to give some career advice, and what better way to start than learning from other people's mistakes. And today we're going to be covering the top 3 most common interviewing mistakes that pretty much most everybody ends up making at some point in their life. And if you stick around towards the end of this video, I'll give one bonus simple tip on once you actually do get that job offer, how to get a better salary. And as always, if you like personal finance type videos like this one, or videos regarding car or home type buying advice videos, I'd greatly appreciate if you consider subscribing to this channel. Every single subscriber, and I sincerely mean this, means a lot to me. Now, the first mistake I wanted to cover actually has more to do with finding an actual right job versus actually getting hired, and that has to do with assuming that the employer is always being honest with you. I can't even count the number of people I've seen or known firsthand that have come back from an interview and are so excited about all the job opportunities that are going to happen once they get this job offer, or the really cool company culture that this company is claiming they have, or the fact that the company is going to pay for their college tuition 100%, and they get very excited, but once they actually have that job and they're working for a few months, they come back to me saying how disappointed they are and the fact that none of that ended up actually happening. They end up learning that all these different opportunities that the job claimed to end up having are only actually offered to select few people, and those few people have it in with the president of the company, or that this open door policy that their boss has, supposedly has anyways, and you can ask them any question, feel comfortable, we're all cool here. They end up realizing that that's pretty much hogwash is probably the nicer way of putting it, but I'm actually thinking of a different term, and that all those pizza parties and those fun company outings are going to happen, but then they actually never do happen, and not having pizza parties is something I will not stand for. So why is it that people have to get tricked into doing a job? Why does the employer feel the need to lie? Well, it all has to do with the fact that from the employer's perspective, they have an incentive, a strong incentive, to fill the role as quickly as possible, which is honestly a red flag for the company as a whole. If they're desperate to just get somebody in that seat and working, then that's a pretty big red flag in terms of the company's overall company culture and longevity in terms of a career path. To kind of illustrate what I mean, if you ask the potential employer, hey, what happened to the previous person with this job, or what's the turnover rate at your company like, they're not going to say something like, well, the previous employee left because they hated their manager, which that manager's me. So they're not going to say that, or that we ended up overworking that person and they were working 60, 70 hours and they asked us for just, $1,000 more for their salary and we turned them down. They're not going to say that because they've invested all this time to get you to that interview point, doing the background check or whatever other steps they need to do. And they're so close to fulfilling that role and getting someone back in that seat that they're not going to pass up on that opportunity. They're going to say whatever they need to say to get you to accept that job. Plus, to many people's surprise, maybe it's perhaps we're a little bit too optimistic or maybe a little bit naive, but the reality is the employer has no obligation to tell you the truth. Obviously, they can't have extreme lies, but in terms of saying, we have a fun company work culture, everybody gets along here, I've never heard of anybody suing a company because they accepted a job offer and there aren't enough casual Fridays as they claimed in the job description. Plus, at the end of the day, it doesn't even have to be a lie. It could just be the employer stretching the truth. Think about it this way. If I say that the job requires approximately 40 hours worth of work per week, that may mean something completely different to you than it does to me. When someone says approximately 40 hours, I'm thinking 40, 41, 42, maybe sometimes 39, but perhaps to you or to a potential employer, that means, 49, 48 hours, or even 40,000. As long as there's a 4 in the number, that's approximately 40 hours per week. Or even in terms of salary, and this is especially true with sales type jobs where you're working on commission, they'll say something like, well, it is possible to make 6 figures, which may be true. There may have been one person, 1 year that made 6 figures because they made so many sales that year, but the reality is the average is actually a lot closer to 30,000 per year, and actually most people end up quitting because they're making so little on those commission sales that it's not worth that job. At the end of the day, the employer needs to find an employee to fill that seat, to fulfill that role. A good company will obviously take its time to find the right person, so that way they don't have high turnover rate and that they're investing in somebody, that person's going to work there for 5 to 10 years. But unfortunately, a desperate company, a bad company, is just going to fulfill that seat. That's tomorrow's problem if that person ends up leaving 6 months down the road. All we need right now is just to find somebody, anybody, to fulfill this job. And then you combine that with the fact that you may be, or somebody like you may end up being a desperate employee. They're just desperate to leave their old job and they just want to find a new job. So a desperate employee, a desperate employer, that's just kind of a bad case, a bad scenario, because the reality is you're going to kind of overlook these red flags. You're going to overlook the fact that the employer didn't really give you an accurate answer on why did the previous person leave that job. They were very vague and dodgy about it, but you need a new job. So what are you going to do? You're going to accept it and overlook it. And then in 3-6 months, you're going to be looking for a new job. Now, the second mistake that pretty much everybody has made at one point in their interview process is being afraid or fearful of saying the wrong things. And you let that fear dictate how you answer these interview questions. In the back of your mind, you're always fearful of saying the wrong answers, and that may end up causing you to not necessarily land that job. The more stressed out you are, the more likely you are to have that response that later on you end up just shaking your head and regretting completely. So if you're calm and collected, you're more likely to give the actual response that you've been preparing for. But if you're stressed out, fearful, in the back of your mind, even just for slight seconds, you're just kind of worried about saying the wrong thing, that means that there's going to be just a few more seconds of delay when you answer a question, or that you're just that much more likely to end up slipping up on your words, or, worst case scenario, you're so stressed out that you just kind of completely blank on the question and have no response at all. So what are things you can do to be more calm and collected in the interview process? Well, I give multiple different advice, but for me, one of the first ones I recommend for people is to just accept the reality we all have to accept, which is that you're going to be interviewing plenty more times. So why not just deal with that fear and stress and anxiety right now? Most people end up working 5 to 10 different jobs in their lifetime. So gone are the days of working at a company for 30 years. Most people on average only end up working at a company for 5 to 7 years. So if you're interviewing now, there's a good chance that you're going to have the same interview process 5 to 7 years from now, and you're not going to be looking forward to it. You're going to be hating it because last time you did it, it was so stressful and so much anxiety involved. If you can just deal with that now, the next time when you look for a new job, it won't be as bad of a burden. The second thing that I generally recommend to people to think about is, why are you fearful of the interview process? Usually it's because you're worried about saying the wrong thing. But if you've done the prep work beforehand, that's the whole reason why you prepare, right? If you're preparing to make sure you don't say the wrong thing, then that fear should be alleviated. If you're still going to be as fearful, then in a way you can just say, well, why even prepare at all? Because in the end, I'm still just as fearful. Or you can actually trust your prep work, trust your homework. The fact that you've practiced these interview questions with different people, you've practiced with your best friend, practiced responding on your toes and giving those good responses, then you should know and trust yourself that you don't necessarily have to be fearful of saying the wrong thing. And the last thing I like to think about is, what is the absolute worst case scenario? What's the worst case scenario that this interview ends up happening? I like to think about it in terms of, you're basically no worse off if you do poorly in this interview. If you hate your current job and you're trying to find a new job and you totally don't do well during this interview, well, you still stay at that job. It's not like they're going to call up your company and say, hey, so-and-so did so bad at this interview, you should fire them. I understand in some people's case that they may be unemployed and so they're really desperate to find work. And I understand the situation, but at the end of the day, all you really can do is just trust that things will work out the way that they're supposed to. I once had this interview that I ended up doing very poorly on. It's probably one of my worst interviews I've ever done. The interviewer ended up asking me a whole bunch of technical questions, and halfway through the interview, it became very apparent that I perhaps was not as qualified for that position as I had once thought. They ended up asking me some technical question. Had I ever used this particular software? I said, I've never used that software, but I am familiar with it. And they were surprised. They were like, you've never used this software? And they kind of shook their head no and just wrote something negative on a piece of paper. And throughout the interview, eventually they asked me a question. Describe a time that you failed and how did you deal with that? And I literally said at that point, I said, I failed this interview completely. And to my surprise, the interviewer still did not give up. They said, really? You think you're failing this interview? Explain to me why. And I'm like, look, I've already thrown in the towel clearly. I don't want to waste your time. I don't want to waste my time. So that was kind of the worst case scenario. As I clearly was not qualified. I ended up getting an email 30 minutes after I walked out that they rejected my application. But at the end of the day, what I recognized to myself anyways is that I obviously wasn't qualified for that job. It was going to be very huge time commitment for me to kind of get up to speed for something that I'm not even qualified for, only to kind of every single day feel like I could get fired because I'm not qualified for that job. Plus, the person interviewing me was going to be my future manager, and clearly our characters did not mesh very well. So in the end, I kind of recognize and have to trust that that job just wasn't right for me. And the same is true for you. Alleviate that fear. Don't be so fearful, because the worst case scenario is that clearly the job wasn't right for you. I'm going to share 2 little tidbits of information from the interviewer's perspective, the person actually asking you the questions, because I've sat in a few of those meetings, and it may give you some insight that may help alleviate that fear and that anxiety. The first being that the person interviewing you, the person asking the questions, has been in that same seat. They understand, they're right there with you. They understand how awkward it is. In most cases, it's just as awkward for them as it is for you, especially because they don't necessarily like asking these questions. They're just asking these questions because it's the standardized HR questions that they have to ask. The second point, and this is a harsh reality that a lot of us don't want to face, is the fact that the person that will end up getting the job isn't necessarily always the most qualified. In a lot of cases, it can just be the person who meshed better with a hiring manager. And the reality is sure, you can prepare some type of small talking point, but the reality is if you don't necessarily care too much for sports and the person you're interviewing with loves sports and that's the only thing they care about, then there may be some other candidate who ended up bonding over them about sports and is less qualified for you. And unfortunately, the reality is you can do everything right and still not get that job, and the other person gets the job just because of this dumb, arbitrary fact that they ended up bonding over something as arbitrary as sports. The very last and probably the most important and critical mistake that most people make during the interview process is not connecting their experience with the job responsibility and job description. Going back to that point I made earlier, the whole reason they're hiring for a position is because most likely that position is empty. So they need someone to fulfill that role and to kind of get the ball rolling again. So if you think about it, does this manager have time to train you forever and take multiple months training you? Probably not. They want someone who can just jump right in. Obviously, companies care about trainability, which is very valuable. But if I'm given two different candidates, somebody who's trainable and somebody who's trainable but also has done previous experience with this particular role, I'm going to select the second person. Think about hiring someone. Do you go with the person that says they could do the job or that they're qualified for the job? Or do you go with the person that says, not only can I do this job, but I've done it before. Here are the previous times I've done this specific task. It's one thing to say, theoretically, I've used the software. I learned it in college, but as we all know, anybody who has gone to school or college and have learned something in that academic type setting, you realize that in a professional setting, it's a lot more difficult. That training material you practice on is a lot different than when you're actually in a professional, high-paced, high-stakes environment. So if you find yourself making statements such as, I'm qualified for this role, I'm qualified to do X, Y, and Z, take it a step further. Say I'm qualified because of this reason. I have done a similar role at a previous company. I can do X, Y, and Z. I haven't done it with this particular software, but I've done it with this other software, which is very similar. Think about it from the hiring manager's perspective. Are you going to take the risk on the person that says, I don't necessarily know accounting, but I am familiar with Excel, and I'm sure I'm trainable enough that I can pick it up very quickly? You're probably not necessarily going to take that risk. Versus asking someone if they've done accounting work and they say, I'm qualified to do accounting work because I've used Excel in a variety of settings. I've used it in scheduling scenarios to schedule thousands or hundreds of employees, so I'm familiar with some of the complex formulas. You may be kind of thinking to yourself, well, that kind of seems like similar skill sets, or perhaps you're thinking, well, those aren't similar skill sets. They're completely different. You can be familiar with Excel and not necessarily be an accountant. That's completely valid, but if you take that first scenario and that second scenario I just gave, which are you going to take the risk on? The person who clearly stated, I don't necessarily know accounting, but I could, or the person who is at least claiming to and has backed it up with some similar type background? It may sound silly, but you have to realize that most people are very quick to make judgments and they end up tuning out the rest. So for example, if in that first scenario I say, I don't necessarily know accounting, but I am familiar with Excel, I've already tuned out that Excel part because at the very beginning you already told me you're not qualified for this job. But in the second scenario, when I say I am qualified to be an accountant because I've used Excel in this other scenario, it leaves it up to me to make that final decision whether or not I think your experience is practical in the actual role I'm trying to fill. In the first scenario, you've already made that decision for me. You already told me you're not qualified. Why would I take that risk? I'd rather take that risk, or at least have that chance and make that judgment myself whether or not that Excel experience in a scheduling scenario can translate into an accounting scenario. Now, before I give my bonus tip on how to increase your salary with a very simple tip, I just want to ask everybody to hit that like button if you you appreciate this video at all. And you can trust me from somebody who has very little subscribers that I very much value every single one that's watching this video, every single like, comment. If you want to contribute as well onto mistakes you've seen people do in interviews, comment down below. Or if you have any requested videos, feel free to comment down below. I'd greatly appreciate it. So the very simple bonus tip in terms of increasing your salary is to just simply ask. And I know you're probably thinking, that's obvious, dislike this video, but just hear me out for a moment. The reality is you can just ask, and I've done this myself before. I've had job offers given to me a higher salary than what I initially asked for in the original application. So already it's a win for me. I've seen scenarios where people have, asked for $50,000. They got offered $60,000, so $10,000 more than they originally asked for. But after the job interview, they got offered $60K, and that the person still came back and asked for more money. And I did this myself too. And it may come to a surprise, but the reality is from the hiring manager's perspective, they're just kind of thinking, well, what's an additional $2,000, $3,000 or $5,000 or even $10,000 when they're that close to sealing the deal on hiring that person? I want to give you two reasons why this whole entire idea of just simply asking works so well in terms of increasing your salary. The first being that it basically costs you next to nothing. It's basically just a simple statement. In some cases, you don't even necessarily have to call them on the phone. You can just write back in the email that they sent the offer to and just ask for an additional $2,000, even just $1,000. That's in a few extra times going out every single month. So it's definitely worth considering. The second reason, which is that it's pretty much unheard of that, I got a job offer from somebody for $50,000 and I ask them for $60,000, and that they're so offended that I asked for more money that they said, you know what, we're rejecting the original offer. We're not hiring it altogether. That's pretty much unheard of. In most cases, from the company's perspective, they'll just say, take it or leave it, take the original offer or not. And so you're not really losing anything by asking. Plus, at the end of the day, you don't necessarily know for that particular company what's their acceptable salary range for that job role. An engineer at one company the acceptable salary range can be from $60,000 to $80,000, and that same exact job role at a different company can be worth $100,000 to $120,000. So you may be surprised when they offer you $110,000, but in their minds, they're thinking, well, that's a middle of the road offer. So you asking for more money is actually pretty reasonable from their perspective. If you want to check out more ed videos regarding career advice, I'll link it down below regarding job hopping, which is where you basically just hop from company to company. And that's actually been proven as one of the best ways to basically boost your income, as well as a video regarding how to negotiate a salary after you actually get that job offer. And if you appreciate this video or any personal finance related videos, I also cover car and home buying type videos. Please consider subscribing to the channel. And as always, I hope to see you in the next one.